and welcome to the Annie's Corner Show. I'm so glad to see you again. Are you ready for your next adventure? Yes? Okay. Well, today's adventure is gonna be with Thumbelina. If you have never heard of Thumbelina before, now you will. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. There once was a woman who wished to have a tiny little child, but she did not know how to find one. So she went to an old witch. I yearn to have a little child. Can you tell me where I can find one? Oh, that's easy, said the witch. Here is a barley corn. It's not the kind that goes in country fields or that chickens eat. Plant it in a flower pot and you will see what you will see. I wonder what she means by that. Thank you, said the woman. She gave the witch a shiny coin and went home and planted the barley corn. A lovely large flower that looked like a tulip sprouted up at once. The petals were tightly closed as though it was still a bud. What a beautiful flower, said the woman, and she kissed its pretty yellow and red petals. Just as she kissed it, the flower opened with a pop. It was a real tulip, but in the middle of the flower, on the velvety green stems, sat a tiny girl. She was delicate and graceful and a thumb high, so the woman called her Thumbelina. She was as big as your thumb. Put your thumb up. That's how big she was. A polished walnut shell was Thumbelina's cradle. Her mattress was made of blue violet leaves, and she was covered by a rose leaf. She slept there at night, but in the daytime, she played on the table, where the woman put a dish of water with a wreath of flowers around it. Thumbelina sailed around the dish on a large tulip leaf, using 2 fine white horsehairs as oars. And she would sing more sweetly than you ever heard before. I imagine she sounds something close to that. One night, as she lay in her pretty bed, an old toad came hopping through a broken pane in the window. The toad was ugly and big. It hopped right down onto the table where Thumbelina lay sleeping under the red rose leaf. That would be lovely for my lovely wife for my son, said the toad. And she picked up the walnut in which Thumbelina lay asleep and hopped back through the window and down into the garden. Oh my goodness, she took Thumbelina. The toad and her son lived in a soft, marshy bank off the broad brook that ran through the garden. The son was ugly and gross and looked just like his mother. Quack, quack, that was all he could say when he saw the graceful little maiden in the walnut shell. Don't speak so loud, or she will wake up, said the old toad. She might run away from us. We will put her on the brook and one of the broad water lily leaves. It will be just like an island for her. She is so small and light as a swan's down. Then she can run away while we put the best room under the marsh in order. There is where you will live and keep house together. I don't know what's gonna happen to Thumbelina. I'm nervous, are you? A great many water lilies with the broad green leaves that looked as if they were floating on the water grew in the brook. The leaf was far out, was the largest of all. The old toad swam out to the leaf and laid the walnut shell on it when tiny Thumbelina woke up early in the morning. And she looked around and she began to cry. There was water all around the big green leaf, and she could not get to land at all. She was so small. The old toad worked down in the marsh, decking out the room with rushes and yellow water leaves. She wanted to be very pretty for her new daughter-in-law. When she was finished, she and her ugly son swam out to the leaf where Thumbelina was stranded. The old toad bowed low before her in the water. She said, "Here is my son, and he will be your husband, and you will live happily ever after." Quack, quack. Was all her son could say. Then they took the walnut shell bed and swam away with it. Thumbelina sat down, weeping bitterly. She did not want to live in the nasty toad's marsh and have her ugly son for a husband. The fishes swimming in the brook had seen the toad and heard what she had said. They lifted their heads out of the water so that they could see the little girl. As soon as they saw how pretty she was, they felt very concerned that she should have to live with the vile toad. They all collected around the stalk that held the leaf on which she sat, and with their teeth they gnawed through the stalk so that the leaf floated downstream. Away went Thumbelina, far away where the toads could not get her. Oh, thank goodness, she's safe so far. Okay. Well, it says, Thumbelina sailed by many towns, and the little birds in the bushes saw and sang, "What a lovely maiden!" The leaf was swept along with her, farther and farther, carrying Thumbelina through foreign lands. Oh no, she's moving more and more away from her mommy. A handsome white butterfly kept fluttering around and at last settled on the leaf. He had taken a fancy to Thumbelina, and she was very glad too, for now she knew the toads could not reach her. It was so beautiful where she was sailing. The sun shone on the rippling water, and it glittered like shining gold. She took her sash and tied one end of it to the butterfly, fastening the other end to the leaf, making it glide so much faster. Just then, a stout brown maybug came flying past. He saw her, and in a flash, seized her slender waist by his claws. Ooh! And he flew up into a tree. The green leaf went on swiftly downstream, carrying the distressed butterfly with it. Thumbelina was so frightened, but most of all, she was worried about the butterfly. She had bound to the leaf because if she could not free him, he would starve. The maybug, however, did not trouble himself about all of this. He sat down with her on the biggest leaf of the tree, offering her the sweet part of the flowers to eat, and declaring that she was pretty, though not at all like a maybug. Soon all the other maybugs who lived in the tree came to pay a visit. They looked at Thumbelina, and the young lady maybugs turned up their feelers and said, "Why, She has no more than 2 legs. How ungainly. She doesn't even have feelers, another said. Oh, her waist is quite slender, and she looks like a human character. A human. Can you imagine? Oh, disgusting. How ugly she is, said all the other lady Maybugs. Oh, they're nasty. The broad Maybug, who had carried her off, had thought Thumbelina was beautiful. But when all the others said she was ugly, he began to believe it and would not like her at all. She could go where she liked. They flew her down and set her on a daisy, and Thumbelina cried because the Maybugs thought she was so ugly that they would have nothing to do with her. Yet she was the loveliest little being you could imagine, as tender and fair as the most beautiful rose petal. So you see, you never let anyone think that you're not beautiful and you're not handsome. Because just because they think that, that doesn't mean you aren't. Because Thumbelina was still beautiful. The whole summer through, poor Thumbelina lived all alone in the big forest. She braided a bed out of blades of grass and hung it up under a large burdock leaf so that she was protected from the rain. She sucked the honey out of the flowers for food and drank the dew that stood on the leaves every morning. The summer and the autumn went by. Then came the cold winter, long winter. All the birds who had sung so sweetly to her flew away. Trees and flowers shed their leaves. The great burdock under which she had lived shriveled up, leaving only a yellow, withered stalk. She was dreadfully cold. Her clothes were tattered. She was so frail and small. Poor Thumbelina. She was nearly frozen. And not the Elsa kind. It began to snow, and every snowflake that fell on her felt like a whole shovelful would feel to an ordinary person. For Thumbelina was tiny indeed. She tried wrapping herself up in a dry leaf, but that did not keep her warm, and she shriveled with cold. Ugh. Poor Thumbelina. Just outside the frozen forest, she came to a huge cornfield. But the corn had gone long ago, and only the naked stubble stood up out of the frozen ground. She was struggling through the field where she came to the house of a field mouse. It was a little hole under the stubble. There the field mouse lived warm and comfortable, with a whole room full of corn and a fine kitchen. Thumbelina stood at the door like a little urchin girl and begged for a bit of barley corn. Please, sir, could I have some more? She had not the smallest bite to eat for 2 days. Poor thing, she was so hungry. You poor creature, said the kind old field mouse. Come into my warm house and have something to eat. She liked Thumbelina and said, if you want, you may stay with me through the winter, but you must keep my room clean and neat and tell me a lot of wonderful stories. So Thumbelina stayed out with the old field mice and had a very good time. We shall have a visitor soon, said the field mouse. My neighbor usually visits me once per week. He is even better off than I am. See, he has a very large house and a beautiful black velvety fur. If only you could get him for a husband. You would be well provided for, but he cannot see. You must tell him the most enchanting stories that you know, okay? But Thumbelina did not care about the neighbor, who was a mole. He came and paid a visit in his black velvet pelt. The field mice told her how rich and how wise he was, and how his house was more than 20 times bigger than hers. She said that he was learned, but that he didn't like the sun or beautiful flowers, and sneered at them even though he had never seen them. Thumbelina was asked to sing, and she sang both. May bug fly, fly away. And she also sang, the monk goes to the field. The mole fell in love. And why? Well, he fell in love with her because of her beautiful voice. But he said nothing because he was a prudent mole. A short time before his visit, the mole had dug a long underground passage from his own house to theirs. Thumbelina and the field mouse could not use it as much as they wished. He begged them not to be afraid of the bird that had passed away that was lying in the passage. It was a whole bird with wings and a beak. It must have passed away when the winter came and had been buried just where the mole had made his tunnel. The mole put a piece of glowing tinder in his mouth and led them through the long, dark passage. What's that? Are you worried about the bird? Don't worry. Watch. Just keep watching. You on this adventure with me? Okay. I promise the bird will be okay. When they came to the bird that passed away, the mole thrust his broad nose up against the ceiling and pushed the earth so that a gray hole was made for daylight to shine through. In the middle of the floor lay the dead swallow, his beautiful wings pressed close against his sides, his head and feet drawn under his feet. The bird had certainly passed away from the cold. That's what they think. Keep listening. Thumbelina was very fond of all the little birds who had sung and twittered so sweetly for her through the through the summer, so she was saddened. But the mole poked the bird with his crooked legs and said, nah, he won't pipe anymore. It must have been miserable to be born a little bird. I'm thankful that none of my children can do that. A bird has nothing but his twig, twig, twig. And then he starves in the winter. You are a very clever mole, observed the field mice. What use is all that tweet tweet to a bird when winter comes? He might still starve and still freeze to death. Thumbelina said nothing. She just looked at the two fools and let them talk. When the two others had their backs turned, she bent down, brushed aside the feathers that covers his head, and kissed the bird on his closed eyes. She's so sweet. Perhaps it was he who sang so beautifully last summer, she thought. how much pleasure this little bird gave me." The mole stopped up the hole through which the daylight shone and took the ladies home. That night, Thumbelina could not sleep at all. She got up out of her bed and wove a large soft carpet of hay. She crept down the passage to the dead bird and spread it over him. Oh, she covered him with the blanket. She laid some cotton wool that she had found in the field mouse's room at the bird's side so that he might be a little warmer lying on the cold ground. "Farewell, pretty little bird," she said. "Farewell, and thanks for your beautiful song last summer when all the trees were green and the sun shone down warmly on us." Then she gently lay her head on the bird's breast, but suddenly she was startled. Something was beating inside the bird. Dun-dun, dun-dun. It was the bird's heart. He was not dead after all. I told you. Only lying there in a deep, lifeless sleep. And now that he had been born, he came back to life. In the autumn, all the swallows fly away to warm countries. If one happens to be left behind, it becomes so cold that it falls down as if it died, and it lies where it fell. The cold snow is going to cover it over. Thumbelina trembled all over. She was so surprised. Compared with her, the bird was very, very large, because remember, she's just a thumb size. She took courage and pushed the cotton wool closer around the poor bird. Then she brought a leaf of mint that she had used as her own blanket and put it over the bird's head. The next night she stole down the passage again. Now the bird was alive, but so weak that she could only open his eyes for a moment and look wearily at Thumbelina, who stood next to him with a bit of tinder wood in her hand for light. "Thank you, pretty little child," said the sick swallow. "I feel so wonderfully warm. Soon I'll get my strength back, and I will be able to fly out in the warm sunshine again." "Oh," said Thumbelina, "it is so cold outside. The ground is frozen and covered with snow. Stay in your warm bed and I will take care of you." Then she brought the swallow water in a flower petal. He drank it and told her how he had torn one of his wings in a thorn bush, and so had not been able to fly as fast as the other swallows as they flew far, far away to the warm countries. At last he had fallen down to the ground, but he couldn't remember anything and didn't know at all how he had fallen in the passage. He remained there for the whole winter, and Thumbelina took care of him and grew very fond of him. She didn't tell the field mouse or the mole anything about it. As soon as the spring came and the sun warmed the earth, the swallow said goodbye to Thumbelina, and she opened the hole that the mole had made before. The sun shone in on them brightly. The swallow asked if Thumbelina would go away with him. She could sit on his back, and they would fly away into the green forest. But Thumbelina knew that the old field mouse would be terribly unhappy. If she left her, that is. "I can't," said Thumbelina. "Goodbye then, sweet, lovely girl," said the swallow as he flew out into the sunshine. Thumbelina watched him go, and the tears came into her eyes. She had become so fond of her dear swallow friend. "Tweet, tweet, tweet, tweet," sang the bird, and he disappeared among the trees. Thumbelina felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. The corn in the field over the house of the field mouse had grown high. It looked like dense wood to tiny Thumbelina. "You must get your trousseau ready for your marriage this summer," said the field mouse. Their neighbor, the tiresome mole in the black velvet coat, had proposed to her. Oh, Lord. "You must have the finest wool and linen dresses. You shall have the best things to wear and to sleep on too when you are the mole's wife." Thumbelina had to have cloth, so the mole hired 4 spiders to weave for her day and night. Every evening the mole paid her a visit, and he was always complaining about the summer sun that was so hot. He should try to live in Florida. About how it burned the earth almost as hard as stone. Then he would say that when the summer was over, he would keep his wedding day with Thumbelina. But she was not happy at all. She didn't like the stuffy old mole. Every morning when the sun rose and every evening when it went down, she'd sneak out the door. Why does nobody ask Thumbelina what she wants? When the wind blew the corn aside, she could see the blue sky, and she thought how bright and beautiful it was, and wished with all her heart to see her dear swallow again. But he did not come back. She thought he had flown away into the beautiful green forest. And when autumn came, Thumbelina had all her wedding clothes ready. "In 4 weeks, we shall have your wedding," said the field mouse. But Thumbelina cried and said she would not marry the boring blind mole. "Stuff and nonsense," said the field mouse. "Don't be stubborn, or I'll bite you with my sharp white teeth. He is a very fine mole to marry. The queen herself doesn't have a fine black velvet fur, and his kitten and feather are full. Be thankful to get him." So the wedding was to take place. The mole had already come to take Thumbelina home. She was to live with him under the ground and never to come out into warm sunshine that he disliked. The little girl was miserably unhappy as she said farewell to the warm golden sun, which the field mouse had at last allowed her to go out and see. "Goodbye, sun," she said, and stretched her hands to it as she walked a little way from the field mouse's house. "Goodbye again," she cried, as she threw her little arms around a small red flower growing near. "Give my love to the dear swallow if you see him again." Tweet, 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 tweet. Oh my goodness! She suddenly heard a familiar sound, and she looked up and saw the swallow swooping overhead. As soon as he saw Thumbelina, oh, he was so happy. She told him how unwilling she was to marry the mole, who would make her live under the earth, deep under the earth, where the sun would never shine. And she burst into tears again. I mean, wouldn't you? That's so dark. Oh. "The cold winter's coming now," said the swallow. "I'm gonna fly far away to the warm countries. Will you come with me? You could sit upon my back, tie yourself on with your sash, and we will fly away from the old mole in his dark room, far away over the mountains, to a place where the sun shines brightly, where it's always summer, and there are lovely flowers. Fly away with me, my dear Thumbelina, who saved my life when I lay frozen in the gloomy underground passage." "Yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina, and she climbed on the bird's back. with her feet on his outspread wing, and tied her sash tightly to one of his strongest feathers. Then the swallow flew high up into the air, over the forest and sea, high up over the great snow-covered mountains. Thumbelina shivered in the cold air, so she crept under the bird's warm feathers and only stuck out her little head to see all the beauty beneath her. At last, they reached the warm countries. The sun shone brilliantly. The sky was azure blue, plum purple, and green grapes grew on the vines. Lemons and oranges ripened on the trees. I think they were flying over Florida at this point. The air was fragrant with the smell of herbs and fresh grass, and the loveliest children ran around, playing with large, brightly colored yellow butterflies. But the swallow didn't stop there. He flew further still, and it became more and more beautiful. Under the magnificent green trees by blue lakes stood a palace of dazzling white marble. Vines wound themselves around the elegant pillars, and at the top were many swallow nests. Here lived the good swallow who carried Thumbelina. "That's my house," said the swallow. "But why don't you choose one of the lovely flowers growing below, and I will put you safely on it, and you'll be as happy as you ever wish to be." "Oh, how delightful," she said and clapped her tiny little hands. It's her choice. Somebody's letting her make a choice. A huge marble pillar had fallen and broken into 3 pieces. Between them grew the most magnificent white flowers. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina and put her on the broad petals. But what was a surprise was a little man sat in the middle of the flower, as transparent as he had been made of glass, and was no bigger than Thumbelina. He had a splendid gold crown on his head and exquisite gleaming wings on his shoulders. He was the fairy angel of the flower. Tiny creatures just lived like him in each of the flowers, and he was the king of them all. "Heaven, how beautiful he is," whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. The small, delicate king was frightened when he saw the swallow. It looked like a giant bird to him. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was overjoyed. She was the fairest maiden he had ever seen. He took the golden crown off his head and put it onto hers, and asked if she would be his wife and queen of all the flowers. He was very different from the ugly toad son, or the mole with the black velvet fur. He was even different from the magpie. So she said yes to the charming king. And from every flower came a pretty lady, or a handmaiden, or a handsome gentleman. Each one brought Thumbelina a present. But the best of all was a pair of her own radiant wings from a butterfly. They were fastened to Thumbelina's back, so she too could fly from flower to flower. There was much rejoicing. The swallow sat above from his nest, singing to them as well as he could, because he was so fond of Thumbelina that he would have liked her to stay with him forever. But he was happy for her. "You shall not be called Thumbelina," said the flower angel. "It is not a pretty name, and you are so very pretty. We will call you Maya." "Farewell, farewell," said the swallow, and he flew away from the warm countries to Denmark, back to Denmark. There he had a little nest over the window where the man who can tell fairy tales live. Do you know that man? His name is Hans Christian Andersen. That's who wrote the book. To him, he sang, tweet, 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 tweet. And from that man, we have the whole story. My, isn't that quite the adventure? Poor Thumbelina was in some crazy situations, wasn't she? Could you imagine if she was forced to marry a mole? Man, we are lucky that we don't have to live like that. But her story ended so well. Thank you so much for joining this adventure with me. Now remember, with every book, there is, ready? A great adventure. Well, that's the Annie's Corner Show. Until next time, here's to our next adventure.